Hello, BookTube. I made a trip to the bookstore today. Not the Brattle Bookshop, but Barnes & Noble, an actual retail bookstore. In Boston, there's one big Barnes & Noble left that is not connected to a school. I believe there's still a Barnes & Noble actively serving the Boston University bookstore. And it might be fairly big, but I haven't been in that part of Boston in quite some time. But there's a great big Barnes & Noble that is just a Barnes & Noble store. In the mall. It's in the mall. And it's the last Barnes & Noble that I worked at. Barnes & Noble, those of you who aren't in this country, that's the big retail bookstore chain, the one that's remaining in this country. And you'll notice it because it's mentioned by omission in all the virtue signaling BookTube channels that say, you should buy this book at your local indie. Definitely don't go to the biggest bookstore in your town, the one that pours a huge amount of money into a gigantic inventory and welcomes everybody. Definitely don't go there. Because I heard from somebody who heard from somebody that the mean girls at the cafeteria don't like that chain. They don't like chain bookstores. We don't like them. Go to your local indie. That's who they mean when those virtue signaling BookTube channels are saying go to your local indie. Who they're looking at is Barnes & Noble, the bookstore chain. I always thought that was really dumb. That attitude was prevalent even before there was a BookTube to weaponize it, and it usually went along with the fact that this is a bad bookstore, that this is evil, that they're putting smaller bookstores out of business. That isn't true. It was rising rent market that put other smaller businesses out of business. It wasn't Barnes & Noble. It wasn't Borders before that. It wasn't Crocs and Bertanos before that. That simply isn't true. It's just a villain that virtue signaling morons like to have in the daily narrative of their lives. One way or another, that went nuclear pretty quick, didn't it? Once upon a time, Barnes & Noble, the bookstore chain, had a big store in the heart of downtown Boston. This one is a little bit further out in what is now a swankier neighborhood. It was once railway lines, but now it's a swankier neighborhood. But once upon a time, Barnes & Noble had a big store in the heart of downtown Boston, in downtown Crossing. The very first big store that was outside of New York, which you could tell from the store number, which was 1004. There were 3 stores in New York, and then there was a 4th in Boston. We were 1004. And I worked at that Barnes & Noble in downtown Boston for a long time, and it was a dank cave of a place. It had 2 front windows, but it was the bottom of a 5-story building, and there was no other natural light. There was certainly there were no windows on the second floor. Our store had the first 2 floors of that building, and the second floor had no natural lighting whatsoever. It had no windows of any kind. Instead, you had those 2 front windows, and then the rest of it was just this dank, horrible interior with flaking asbestos and exposed electrical wiring, unclassifiable stains on the 30-year-old carpets and whatnot. But oh my, did I have fun at that store. Oh my, did I ever. I applied there just to work in a bookstore, and the woman who talked to me about my application, she took me aside in a little room, took me aside and said, well, this all looks good, and we'll start you off on the second floor in the kids section. They're about something nice and quiet and low pressure. And I said, I'd really like the first floor information desk during the lunch rush, if you don't mind. I'd like the most pressure you could give me. And she went, oh, really? And I said, well, yeah. I know where everything in the store is, and I know all about the books that aren't in the store. I'd be perfectly happy to do that. So she did. What I meant by a lunch rush is this was before the internet. So all of the people in Greater Boston, all the people down in Post Office Square, all the thousands of people just 1 block over in the business district, all the students all around, everybody all morning long would be generating not only the urge to go to the bookstore, but also questions to ask at the bookstore that they couldn't just immediately snap your fingers and get an answer to. Not only informationally, but also knowledge. I'm going to go to the bookstore not just so that somebody can tell me, can you remind me what won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction last year? It's on the top of my, it's on the tip of my tongue, but I can't remember. Not only that, but the follow-up question, what did you think of it? Is it worth my time? The bookstore staff could also answer that question. Good luck today with any bookstore staff, because we've all outsourced that to the internet. No need for that anymore. But once upon a time, that was happening from 9 o'clock when everybody got to work until noon when everybody went to lunch. Half of Boston's 2 million strong workforce went to lunch at noon. The other half went at 1. So at 10 past noon every weekday, suddenly the store would boom with customers. It would be what we called the lunch rush. And there was an information desk, a big information desk. There were 2 people usually at the information desk, and they could call for help if they needed it. And lines would just form at the information desk. Lines of people lining up to ask questions. Ask where things are. Ask what about things. Ask for, my daughter brought home some airport copy of the Kama Sutra or the Bhagavad Gita. I want to know about this thing. Do you have any idea what are good translations or commentaries or something like this? Lines would form of people with a million different kinds of questions. I could never predict what they would be. And right from the beginning, I was there to greet those lines. And that was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And then the 12 o'clock noon part of the lunch rush would sort of peter out, and the staff would sort of catch its breath, and then at 1:10 the second wave of the lunch rush would arrive, and that wouldn't peter out until a little past 2, except during the holiday season when the lunch rush started at 10:30 and just kept going all day. Glorious times. And we had a lot of fun. That's Deb and I had a lot of fun at that rackety old store. Just a lot of fun. And then the store had a number of reverses. The air conditioning kept giving out, and we kept having to work anyway in a store with no ventilation where the temperature was 115 degrees all day. And it started, and our landlord was a mean, vicious a-hole who went crazy and thought that he could suddenly triple the rent and that Barnes & Noble would pay it. And Barnes & Noble told him to take a long walk on a short pier. In fact, considering the family that founded Barnes & Noble, they're lucky they didn't send him off that short pier in a burlap sack. But one way or another, they decided just to close that store, just to close the big store in downtown Boston and move all of the staff. Very generous on the company's part. They said, nobody's going to lose any hours, not even 1 hour. We'll move you all to this other store, the one in the mall on the other side of town. A very much different thing. All windows, state-of-the-art air conditioning, gorgeous, everything clean and gorgeous. Just a lovely store. So that people like me and Deb didn't fit in at all. The look didn't work at all. It was only once we opened our mouths, it was only once we started talking to customers that the managers who were at that new store said, oh, okay, we'll keep them. We'll definitely keep them. Because Deb and I we didn't care about corporate sales goals or quotas or anything like that. But nevertheless, if a customer walked up to either one of us with a book they were looking for, they would leave with 5 books. And shark-like managers noticed that sort of thing. So we had a modicum of fun at that new store. I think the writing was on the wall. I think it was clearer than either one of us wanted to admit that it just wasn't going to last. The company itself was changing, was becoming more brainless, more profit-oriented, more coercive, more bottom line, and valuing a lot less anything like the expertise of their staff. That wasn't actually what drove me away. I wasn't driven away by Barnes & Noble so much as I made the decision on my own. I remember vividly, I was standing at the registers. At the new store, there wasn't any lunch rush. By then, the internet was firmly in place. If people had a book question at 10:30 in the morning, they could answer it at 10:31 in the morning. They didn't have to go to the bookstore to ask it. There wasn't any lunch rush. There wasn't any point at me being at the information desk because I wasn't going to have any customers. But I noticed that the customers were at a steady stream at the registers and that questions could happen there. So, and the registers turned out to be very easy to do. I never worked the registers at the old store. The head cashiers would literally drive me away with brooms. But I learned the registers at the new store. And one day, I was standing at the registers. At the moment, I didn't have a customer, but I'd had a fairly steady stream of customers, so it wasn't boredom. I was standing at the registers, and I suddenly realized I'm losing money by standing here. I'm losing money by not being home with my dogs on my couch working for better money. This is actually costing me money, and am I getting enough out of this to cost me money? Now, if I'd asked myself that question at my booming information desk in the mid-1990s downtown, I would unhesitatingly have said, yes, I don't care if I'm losing money. I wouldn't miss this for the world. But that day, I realized I was done with retail Barnes & Noble. I realized I was done with retail bookselling. At least maybe that's wrong. You know, maybe I'm wrong about that. Certainly, I had that kind of moment of realization about getting out of book reviewing, and I was wrong about that. Maybe in 10 years' time, I'll say I was wrong to leave retail bookselling, if there's any retail bookselling left. And Deb lasted a while longer, but the managerial, the store atmosphere was just so mean and bean counting and soulless that eventually she left too. But the store is still there, and it has a vast amount of stuff to look at. Huge displays of new hardcovers, huge displays of new paperbacks, a gigantic newsstand. The row of magazines goes half the length of an American football field. Just incredible. So I had an opportunity, and I went there, and I want to show, now that I'm done with that huge preamble, I want to show you what I got. I got a book. I got one of these taller mass market paperbacks. It's Meg. It's Meg, Generations by Steve Alton. Look at that cover. This is a Meg novel I have not read. I missed it completely. I think, from what I can figure out, it was published in this paperback form. I don't think this was an original hardcover. I think it just came out this way, and I've never read it before. So I found a Meg novel. I grabbed it. But all the other things I got were periodicals. And I want to show you those. There's the Claremont Review of Books, which is just big. It's just got dozens and dozens and dozens of book reviews. I get it every once in a while. I don't get it religiously, and I don't subscribe to it because I've never really been blown away by the quality of the reviews. But a lot of them have been good enough, and I don't get to the big bookstore that often. So when I saw it, I grabbed it. I also got another critical magazine, The Critic, which is fairly new, if I remember correctly. This is fairly new in the United States. And this also has look at how thick this thing is. There's just a vast amount of writing all through here, and an enormous amount of the stuff that's in here is critical. I mean, is critical reviews of books or bookish trends. With the problem with the Claremont Review and with The Critic is that I'm not 100% sure of the political leanings. You know they'll be there, and maybe the editorial team says to the critics, usually there's a distinct no man's land, a neutral zone between the political parts of a political magazine and the so-called back of the book. And usually in the back of the book, the books and arts section, you do not need to reflect any politics. In fact, you can leave them out completely. Usually, editorial editors or editors-in-chiefs will tell their book section or their arts editor, you have a free hand. We are not expecting you to carry water for the political side. But sometimes not. And then the reviews can be really soiling to read, because then it's driven by a house ideology, and so it's not about the book. And it has to be about the book. so I'm not 100% sure of the political leanings of either one of those. So we will see. Maybe I'll regret both of them. Then this next one, I let my subscription lapse. I need to look into that. I need to get that fixed. This is The Atlantic, Boston's own, once upon a time, Boston's own Atlantic. Even though Meg is about a giant prehistoric killer shark that is somehow killing people in the present day, it was The Atlantic that struck me as science fiction, because the main article is you see Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, on the cover. But the title of the article that is about Boris Johnson is called Boris Johnson Knows Exactly What He's Doing. I think it's a pretty safe bet that he does not. So that struck me more of science fiction than this. but I haven't read The Atlantic. I must have let my subscription lapse, so I'll give it a try. And then New York Magazine, which has had, I have liked New York Magazine on and off for the whole length of its time, the whole length of its existence. And every once in a while, they will have a great book section, great books coverage. That sort of seemed to me to implode about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and I don't think that it's recovered. I used to go to New York Magazine for the books coverage. I used to buy whole issues just for that, even though I didn't care about any of the rest of it. But that's not the reason why I bought this issue. See if you can guess the reason why I bought this issue. No, you beg. The description of the article here is how adopting a dog in the city became more competitive than getting into college. It's by Ali Conti. There's a lot of other stuff in this issue that looks like it'll be really good. But the article about Ali Conti is about dog adoption, so of course I grabbed it. And Oh my, what a depressing article. Depressing and also completely identifiable. I know that the author is not doomsaying here because I have been through a lot of this myself. I've seen it up close and personal. It's all about the incredible amount of hoops that dog adoption agencies make ordinary, well-intentioned people go through in order to adopt a so-called rescue dog. A dog that the dog adoption agency is trying to help, allegedly trying to help. I want to read you the way this begins. Ali Conti is a terrific writer. It was a rainy Sunday in June, and Danielle had fallen in love. The 23-year-old paralegal spent the first part of her afternoon in McCarran Park, envying the happy dog owners with their furry companions. Then she stumbled upon an adoption event at a North Brooklyn beer garden where a beagle mix being paraded out of the rescue van reminded her of the dog she grew up with. Snickers. It all felt like fate, so she filled out an application on the spot. She was then joined by her best friend and roommate, Alexa, in sitting across from a serious-looking young woman with a ponytail who was searching for a reason to break her heart. Danielle and Alexa were confident they would be leaving with Millie that day. After all, they had a 1,000-square-foot apartment within blocks of McCarran and full-time employment with the ability to work from home for the foreseeable future. In other words, ideal owners. I've seen this so many times. This is nothing short of true. But the volunteer kept posing questions that they hadn't prepared for. What if they stopped living together? What if Danielle's girlfriend's collie mix didn't get along with her new family member? What would be the solution if the dog needed expensive training for behavioral issues? Which vet were they planning on using? All of which, upon reflection, were reasonable questions. That is absolutely not true. The only reasonable question in that batch is about the other dog. The only reasonable question there is, well, if there's another dog in the apartment, that could be a deal breaker. They might hate each other. So tell me about that. All the other questions are totally unreasonable. And the answer is none of your effing business what vet I'm going to use. But it gets worse. It gets worse. This next paragraph might seem exaggerated to you, especially if you live in the American South or the American Midwest, where it tends not to be this bad. But this is definitely true in the Northeast. All of which, upon reflection, were reasonable questions. But when it came to the diet they planned for the dog, they realized they were out of their depth. Danielle recalled that Snickers had lived to 16 and a half on a diet of Blue Buffalo Wilderness, the most expensive stuff that was available at her parents' Bay Area pet store. Would you want to live on the rest of your life on lean cuisine for the rest? Would you want to live the rest of your life on lean cuisine? Sniffed the volunteer with a frown. She would instead recommend a small batch raw food brand that cost, when they looked it up later, up to $240 a bag. If you were approved, you'd need to get the necessary supplies and take time off from work, starting now, the dog gatekeeper said. And the first 120 days would be considered a trial period, meaning we would reserve the right to take your dog back at any time. The would-be adopters nodded solemnly. Now, at that point, they should have just bolted, because I have known this is how dog adoption from alleged rescue societies has changed over the course of the last 20 years. It's become, no, you beg. No, it's become, convince me that I should let this dog go to your loving home instead of being euthanized next week the way she's scheduled to be. Convince me. I knew one animal rescue, so-called rescue league in Western Massachusetts, that used to tell would-be adopters not only that bit about the first 120 days or trial period, but also that the adoption adoption agency reserves the right to make surprise visits at your home unannounced. Not just the outside of your home, but inside. They'll knock on the door and they'll come walking around, just doing a spot check. And as a result, the article doesn't really hammer this home, but I can tell you as what you already know, just from reading that and doing 2 and 2. The result is that a lot more dogs are dying. A lot more dogs that are in supposed rescue shelters are dying because the a-hole staff whose job it is to find them good homes is turning away more people than they accept. And a part of me understands a bit of the reason for that. Right? If you are a volunteer working in one of those facilities, I have done that many, many, many times. Nothing breaks your heart more than to have a dog that you've seen that dog waiting around in a cage, miserable for weeks, maybe even months. Then it seems like you found just the right person, and the dog is so happy, and you watch them go out the door. Nothing breaks your heart more than for them all to come trooping back in a day or 2 days or a week, or worse, to have the people who adopted the dog send somebody else back in with the dog because they can't face you themselves. Nothing breaks your heart more than that, and nothing breaks the dog's heart more than that. They know perfectly well what has happened, and it just destroys them. So I understand why you would be extra sensitive, extra picky. I understand why you would want to make absolutely sure that there isn't a deal breaker lurking there. You don't want that to happen to yourself or to the dog. But I don't know if this is true. In fact, this is a question for you. I want to know, are your local dog adoption agencies, have they gotten this bad? Because most of the ones that I've dealt with in the past 10 years have got this bad, where they're not just anymore super sensitive for potential deal breakers, for potential problems. They're not just super sensitive to that anymore. Now they're actively looking to deny you a dog. They'll come up with anything. Now, I don't know if Ali Conti exaggerated that detail about the adoption agency person telling the owner they need a $240 bag of dog food. I don't know if that's exaggerated for effect or not, but things like that happen up and down the eastern seacoast of this country every single day. And as I said, and as you will, the article's fantastic, but the one conclusion you come to at the end of it is that the big loser are the dogs. Obviously, the people who are going to be the big losers are the people who are helpless. The helpless people in the situation are always going to lose, and they do lose in this. Fewer and fewer people pass the test. One character, one person later on in that article is watching a televised plea to please save these dogs. You're their last hope, and yelling at the screen, "You turned me down. I'm here in my living room where I work. I'm here all the time. I love to go on walks, and there's no one here living with me because I wanted to adopt one of your dogs, and you said no." Hand in hand with this, of course, is another issue that I faced when I trained dogs and also when I worked at animal rescue leagues, which is how many people overestimate what a dog actually needs. This article highlights the fault of the rescue agencies, who have become more and more Nazi-like as the years have passed, so that now they'll laugh in your face. You'll go in and say, "I want to adopt one of these dogs. I want to walk out with one today," and they'll laugh in your face. I'll say, "I'm sorry, sir, that's not how it works." You? I don't think so. Bank statements, genetic samples, 5 testimonials from people, and they have to be delivered in person, etc., and spot inspections of your home, all that sort of crap. But it's also another reason why dogs at shelters typically don't get adopted, is because perfectly good candidates don't think they have enough. They don't think they have enough to offer a dog. And unless you are getting a dog that has extensive medical needs or really bad separation anxiety, and really bad separation anxiety can be fixed, or if you're getting a rambunctious puppy, you can't leave a rambunctious puppy alone for 10 hours in an apartment that is the surface of the moon to a dog. You can't do that. But if you're getting a normal dog, the normal run of dogs that you get at a rescue shelter, in other words, dogs that have had a traumatic past or have had a stable past and lost it, so they'll be incredibly grateful to get it back, all they want is the love you can give them and the freedom to sleep in the sun all day. That's all that most of them want. If you're willing to take that dog on a nice, vigorous walk in the morning, you go to work, maybe you come back at lunch, take them on another walk, a shorter one, then you come back from work, you take them on another long, vigorous walk, let them hang out with you on the couch, give them food, water, love, medical care. If you do that, your dog will adapt. That is not a punishment for a dog at all. I've heard so many people say that. I've heard so many people who have a perfect home to offer a dog say, "Well, I have a 4-room apartment and I work part-time from home, but I don't have a sprawling 2-acre yard, and really I wouldn't want to adopt a dog if I didn't have." What on earth? What on earth? I always want to say that. I always want to tell those people. I often did tell those people, believe me, no one on the surface of the planet is in a better position to speak on behalf of the dogs who are here and want homes. Believe me when I tell you, what you have to offer is plenty, especially if you're going to do the right thing and go to your local shelter and adopt a dog that nobody wants. Adopt an older dog is the goal, is the advice that I almost always give. Adopt an older dog. They're not going to live there forever. The sliding scale of which dogs are euthanized is almost always tipped in favor of age. Go to your local shelter. If you have anything in the way of being able to have a dog, keep in mind, homeless people on the sidewalk have dogs who love them. Okay, and they have literally nothing. If you have anything in the way of an available home for a dog, anything in the way of that, and you have a shelter that is, you have access to a shelter that isn't one of the ones in this article, that isn't one of the ones that's going to laugh at you, but instead are going to be grateful to see you come in, then maybe go, maybe think about it, and then maybe go, walk in the door and say, I want to adopt the oldest dog you have here. And that's it. Believe me, you're going to end up loving that dog no matter what it is. You don't have to do any kind of on-the-spot psychological examination. You don't have to wait for any kind of mystical connection. You're going to love the dog, no matter what. You know you are. In fact, my best advice, if you are gone all day, would be to say, I want to adopt the 2 oldest dogs, so they have companionship. But one way or another, the article was horrifying. It was great to read. The writer of the article, I will watch her name from now on. She did a fantastic job. But boy, oh boy, was it sad. You know, because I used to volunteer in that world, and I know the heartbreak. I know the heartbreaking stories. And I always avoid them. Myself, I always avoid them. When it comes time for me to get a new dog, it's always so-called fate that steps in. It's always some happenstance, some accident that always steps in. So that every time I have dogs, whether it's 5 dogs, 6, 7 dogs, 1 dog, 2 dogs, 3 dogs, no matter what number I have, when they are dwindling, when they are sickening, when they are aging and dying, every single time I think, all right, well, this time, you can't count on happenstance. So this time I will end up for a horrible week of grieving without a dog of any kind. And then I will go to the shelter. I will go to the nearest shelter and I will say, I would like to adopt your 2 oldest dogs. And I've never had the opportunity to do that. The dogs come to me. Whether it's that, you know, a family member can't hold on to them anymore and they immediately think of me, or a friend, in Frida's case. In your case, baby, hi. Hi, baby. In Frida's case, a friend saying, well, this puppy's really cute, but she's peeing and pooping. Do they keep doing that? Or in the case of my Basset Hound Lucy, literal happenstance, where I was walking 4 other dogs, and a Basset Hound puppy was running around in traffic, literally running around outside with no leash, no collar, and an inactive chip in her leg. So total happenstance. Happens anyway. It happens anyway. To me, it always does. Nevertheless, that was my bookstore visit. I could have gotten a lot more stuff. I was noticing when I was there were impulse buys everywhere. Of course, the store is set up to facilitate impulse buys. But instead, all I got were a pile of periodicals and a Meg novel. So that was, I consider that to be a very successful bookstore visit. No idea when I'll be back to that Barnes & Noble. I know a handful of people still there who, you know, always have a minute to spare, a minute of a friendly conversation. And I admit, it feels weird. It feels weird to walk around, even now, even after all this time, it feels weird to walk around in a Barnes & Noble without helping customers. You'd think that impulse would go away, but I'm one of the rare retail workers at a retail Barnes & Noble who didn't hate his job. I loved my job. And I admit, when I walk into that store, I still have the first impulse. Usually when I walk into that store, sometimes that store, but always the old store in Downtown Crossing, the first thing I did, sometimes even before I took my coat off and punched in, would be immediately start nosing into customers' business. And they didn't mind. I saw them mind when coworkers of mine tried to imitate that. They never seemed to mind when I did it. I don't know if that was just an affect that I give off, an air, a canine thing, one way or another. It was my favorite thing to do. I just walk around the store saying, what you looking at? What are you looking for? Anything here that you're not finding that you want me to help you find? I'd be happy to do it. Customers would say, well, I don't want to take you away from anything. And I'd say, talking to you about books sure beats working. They would just crack up, and we would go and find whatever it was that they were looking for, even if what they were looking for was true in so many cases, was a terrific recommendation. I lost count of how many customers I would walk up to them, I'd butt into their business, I'd say, what are you looking for? Anything I can help you find? And they'd say, yeah, I'm looking for something. And I'd say, okay, I know exactly where that is. Here, let's go and we talk about your work or the weather in the meantime until we get there. And then I'll just hand it to you. I know exactly where it is. I won't waste any of your time. And during that conversation, the customers would always get the impression that I knew what I was talking about when it came to books. So inevitably, by the time we got to their book or long before, they would say, there is one other thing. I would always smile when I heard that because I knew it was coming. I'd like a recommendation. I lost track of how many customers I talked to in that bookstore who said a variation of the same thing, which is, it's been too long since I read a book that absolutely blew me away. Is that weird? I mean, is that a youthful thing? Or do books still do that? I would say books still do that. I wouldn't be in this job if books didn't still do that. Books still do that. It's just most people have terrible ways of getting book recommendations. I can recommend books that will blow you away. And when you're done with the one I recommend, we'll add it to the book you're looking for. And when you're done with it, you come back and I'll recommend you another one. You just keep coming back. And I had some customers say, well, can't you just make me a list? And I'd say, no, I'm a drug dealer. I want you to keep coming back. So I walked into that store today. I saw a customer fishing around in the history section, and I had to resist the urge to walk over and say, what are you looking for? What can I help you find? But anyway, that was my trip to the bookstore. It's weird to talk about a trip to the bookstore when it's not the Brattle, but I still enjoyed it. So if I go again, you can be sure I will bore the pants off you. Mine are already off. With more stories. In the meantime, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.